We
sorry,
can go
Mr.
ahead and
Chairman.
call the meeting to order at
Just-
6:31.
Seriously, go
So
ahead.
we're ready to roll.
We're just kidding.
All right.
Yeah.
So we'll call the meeting to order. Christie, will you do roll call?
Okay, Shannon Sykes,
Present.
Christy Hazeman, present. Caitlin Keeker,
Present.
Susan Fast.
Present.
Pam X and Val Ahmed are both absent. Visitors, there are 2 sign-in sheets over
Andy.
there.
Andy.
Oh, excuse me, Andy Pearson. Absent. All right, so there's 2 sign-in sheets for the 2 different meetings, so please register your name there for the acting clerk.
Very good.
All right.
And there might be extra packets or anything else that you might need, but for the most part, everything will be up here. We have, just to let them know, Shannon, we have the Truth and Taxation meeting now, followed by our regular board meeting, which we'll also be using this because the auditors will be one of the first folks to be up and running, and they also have a PowerPoint. So just to let you know how that would work.
Okay.
But Mr. Chairman, whenever.
Yep. So we'll do the approval of agenda as presented or amended. Do you have a motion?
I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Second. So I have a first by Christie and a second by Caitlin Keeker. Any
Any
discussion or? No, if none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 4-0. And Mr. Thomas, if you want to do your presentation.
I will. Being a teacher by trade, really, I prefer to be standing up and moving around, but I can't do that and do my clicker thing here, so I apologize for that. But and also in my role that I've been in for many years now as superintendent, this is one of my fun things to do because we get to explain all about the taxes and the funding and everything that people sometimes ask about, wonder about, and yet they maybe understand, maybe they don't understand. So this is a great time for us to present to everybody, including the board, not just the public, but and then also to answer questions. So looking forward to that part of it as well. Probably best if you keep the questions till the end, because I can always go back if you want me to do that, but that's the procedure. So first thing is Truth and Taxation is a Minnesota law, but it's not only a Minnesota law. As far as I know, it's everywhere in the country. Everywhere that I've known of, it's also something that is expected that every entity will follow. In other words, every county, every township, every city, and every school district, for sure in our state, and that's all we care about right now, is responsible for presenting what's called the Truth and Taxation. Because at this point, at the regular board meeting, you'll also hear us talk about a resolution that will set our levy for this next year. And it's based on, first of all, us explaining to everybody and making sure that if you have any questions about any of this, that you have a chance to ask those and get answers for some of those questions. So that's what the law is about, and the last week or two and the next week is when all of us throughout the state, for sure, are doing this. So that's what it's called. I always have to remind everyone, because it's usually shown as TNT. People say TNT, Truth in Taxation, Truth in Taxation. It's not Truth in Taxation. It's truth. Excuse me. It's not Truth and Taxation. It's Truth in Taxation. The whole idea is that we are truthful. Every entity is truthful in how we tax, but half the time I get emails from different folks about different things about this that says truth and taxation, and it's just not quite accurate. The second part, that's the first part, we have to do this. Second part of the law pertains to the Truth in Taxation meeting that we're having here for us today, which is about our taxing for our particular jurisdiction. We are a taxing jurisdiction. We can tax sometimes without voter approval, but typically with voter approval, and that's what this is all about tonight. So the requirements of the Truth in Taxation meeting, first of all, discuss proposed property tax levy for taxable payable taxes for that we approve today, payable next year, that we receive actually the year after. Provide and discuss information on the current budget, which we'll be talking to you about, and that's the year that we're in now, the 2021 that we're in, and it goes, as you know, until the end of June of 2022. Then the public must be given a reasonable amount of time to comment on the proposed property tax levy and the budget, and to ask any questions that you might have. Points to remember: revenue formulas are set by the state legislature except for voter-approved referendums. So for the most part, the state controls all of that, and they frankly control a whole lot of the voter-approved referendums and how that's all done. But just letting you know that for the most part, the state determines quite a bit of what our taxes will be, except at the local level we can approve more if we choose to. And probably 2/3 of the districts in the state do that. Local levy and state aid mix are set by the state legislature. Again, that's set by them. In other words, how much is coming from the state and how much is allowed to come from the local government. And an increase in local taxes does not necessarily mean an increase in revenues for the school district. Keep in mind, as I said, not only are we doing this tonight, but so are counties and cities and townships. And there are some other kinds of entities as well, like, for example, roads and lighting and other kinds of organizations that control some taxation. If they chose to, somewhere else tonight, approve a higher tax, let's just say the city of Butterfield decided to raise their taxes today, and they had a meeting today, let's just say, our taxes here would go up, but it wouldn't be because of the school. It would be because of some other entity. And just letting you know that often people come to meetings such as this. I've had it happen very frequently, because they're thinking, well, this is where I can go and complain about my taxes. Yeah, you can, but maybe the tax you're thinking about complaining about isn't really even a tax that we had anything to do with. The levy limitation and certification. State law sets the maximum that we're allowed. If you recall back a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, I was talking about we got to, and also this last year, I should say this last month, when we were having our vote, I said that we actually have to tax the maximum that we can possibly tax, and even then we don't get a whole lot of money out of it, because we don't have that many properties, I'll just say that right now, I'll tell you more in a second, that have that much value that we get a whole lot of money out of when we tax them. So the state law says, well, you can't tax people forever and ever and ever for communities like ours. Just because you think you need more money doesn't mean you can tax them, I'll just say, some huge amount. So they set that maximum, which is obviously a wise thing for them to have done. The Department of Education then computes the levy, and the state, the school board then, our school board in our case, certifies that levy, and that's what we're talking about doing later this evening. Just a bit about taxes, property taxes. There's the taxable market value. If you look at the estimated market value of any property, then you subtract from that the market value exclusion. Depending on the kind of property you have, there may be an exclusion that you have with it. For example, ag property, homesteading property. If you homestead your property, and most of us would, then you end up with the taxable market value of that particular property. So then you take the taxable market value, multiply that times the class rate, which is essentially what's the rate that's been approved by whomever, in our case the school district, or it would be again the city and the county in our situation. We have the three entities that would be taxing people. And so you multiply that, and then you end up with your net tax capacity. That's the total net tax that is going to be generally spent, generally taxed as a total for anyone in our area. Here's an example of a tax statement that you might see. If you just so you if you knew your valuation, in this case it has an estimated market value of $150,000. The homestead exclusion, like I mentioned a minute ago, is $23,800. So you subtract that and you get your $126,200. Out of that, that's your market value, then your taxable market value, your TMV, and then based on that is what your tax will be. So that's something that you can appeal to. And see at the bottom there, it says the time to appeal or question your classification or your valuation is now. And that's why they send us out ahead of time. So if you think, oh no, a house isn't worth that much, or whatever it is your question, then you can appeal that. It happens all the time, and don't hesitate to do that. That's with the county that's doing setting the value on your property. Statewide share of tax liability. This is an interesting setup because what it does is it shows what would be the portion of the state taxes that typically would come from these different entities, and what actually is payable from these different entities. So, for example, farms, as we are aware of here in the pretty much a farming community, the market value share that it would normally be expected to be paid here because of our value of our farming property, our true value, is 17.7%. This is a statewide average, by the way. Ours would be much larger than that, but this is just a statewide example. The share of the taxes that are payable from these properties is only 6.8%. So obviously, it doesn't take too much looking at the math here, and you can see that the farmers get a break, and of course we know that, and that's been done for years now, and for all sorts of good reasons. But typically, if they weren't given a break, they would be paying a 17.7%. That's kind of what this is to show you. Seasonal recreational residential is kind of similar in that their market share would be 3.8%, but their share truly is only 2.6%. That's seasonal recreational residential. The opposite of this is the commercial and industrial. They pay a lot more compared to what you think of as their fair share. The market value share is 14.6% statewide, but statewide they actually pay 32.6%. So they pay well over twice as much of taxes as what they would argue would be their share because of them only having 14.6% of the value in the state. So they of course don't like that, but there's no other choice. That's how it is in the entire state of Minnesota. All others are about the same, 14.1% as opposed to 14.5%, so very similar. And the bottom one is most of us, residential homes. The market value share is 49.8%, just about half of all the property value in the state, which would be 50%, and yet we pay 43.4%. So even the regular homeowner gets a bit of a break compared to what some would argue which would be the amount that we would be paying or should be paying. The ag school tax credit, I was kind of hinting at that a minute ago, is a permanent law that was put into effect in 2017. There were other aspects of it that were put into effect long before then. And it affects all the existing Fund 7 debt levies that we would have, except for the bonding issues that we would have. This is for reductions for farmers and timber owners, and it's scheduled to scale to 70% in 2023. It was, I think, starting out at 25%, and now it's substantial, so that the farmers get a break because of this particular credit. And then the revenue for this comes from the state income, sales, and other tax revenues. So what, in other words, those dollars, let me say it this way, those dollars that we would normally get from the farming community because of the value of their property, they don't have to pay. Well, then Okay, so then the whole farming area, the schools like us and cities and townships would be not getting any money because they have so much farming community, farming acreage, and farming value. Well, that wouldn't be good. So how does the state fix that? They make up for that. They pay us what we essentially what we lose, or almost what we lose, and that's the 70% that we're talking about here. That they don't give us back all that we would have otherwise gotten, but they pay us back about 70%, or what they will in another year and a half. So that's kind of how that works. It's a tax credit for the farming community, and then we get the money back through the state as revenue from the various funds that we get from the state. I don't know if Lindsay, you wanted to add anything to that?
So how this plays a role for Butterfield is, if you remember, in the summer of 2019, when we did the broiler project, to do that you have to take out debt. And with that, now we do have the debt service fund, which you'll see in a later slide when we look at the different funds that our levy dollars make up. And because now we have that Fund 7, or the debt service fund, it generates now this egg to school credit based upon that. So we'll see that comes through on our state aid side of things versus seeing it on our levy side of things. So it's actually something, because of the timing of how property taxes are always a year behind from the approval date with revenue recognition and when the bonds were sold and completed, we are now seeing it in fiscal year 22 related to that project. So that's why this is something new for Butterfield, and why we're going through it is because of those that project that we did, and it created debt.
Thank you. Yeah, Lindsay, as I think everyone knows, is our financial person for the school, and I'll throw some questions at her every so often to elaborate on what I'm talking about. The next slide is an increase in pay for 2022. Again, the 60% ag tax credit on bonds is kind of what she was referring to. As we were just saying a minute ago, that it's going to be going up to 70% next year, or a year and a half from now. Right, this next year is 60%. Before then, it was the year we're finishing up is 55%, and so that's what she's referring to with regard to the tax credit on bonds. Again, you can find your Ag 2 school credit by looking again at your essentially your bill from the county, and what it shows there in that arrow. Now, this is a situation where there wasn't much of a tax credit at all, but your property taxes before the credits was $1,479.52, and the school building bond credit because it would be a small bond that was taken out, much like ours. That would be only a $12 credit because it didn't cost that much to begin with, and therefore the property taxes after the credits is minus that $12. So that's a property tax statement that would be coming out, or be payable, I should say, this next year for a person. This is a graph that shows what the difference between the funding that we used to get and compared to what the funding that we now get based on the cost of inflation. So I'll just read the bottom real quickly to say it kind of differently. The funding trails inflation by about $639 per pupil. If you go back to 2003, which was at this point $568 million annually. Now, I'll say it differently. If the state kept up with inflation and kept paying us every year as they should, based on the real cost of our buying things and paying salaries and such, that would be that red line that you see, and they didn't. They chose not to. And then you can see that the green spotted line, they chose not to fairly quickly after 2003. And then after 2 years, they said, well, maybe we should try doing that now. That wasn't a good idea. Well, they did that. They kind of kept up, as you can see, it's the kind of parallel lines for a while, and then after that, they slowed down and they've kind of kept that distance away from reality, from what our real costs are, such that that's the gap that you see from the burgundy line down to the green dotted line is the $639 per pupil that we do not get because they haven't been keeping up with inflation. Not that they don't still give us a fair amount of money, and you'll see that in a little bit, but they don't give us as much as we need to keep up with inflation and various cost increases. Similar here, this is with state aid for levies and with regard to revenues. If you look at the top um, line graph, again, the burgundy is the levies. Again, this is a statewide average. This isn't ours in particular. That's how far the local levy taxes have gone up. And the yellow line at the bottom is state aid. And as you can see, state aid didn't keep up with inflation and didn't keep up with the dollars that were needed. And so what you can see from the blue dotted line is that in between those two is how the local levies, the local taxpayers like us, have had to pay those additional dollars to bring up the amount that was needed to run the schools because the state frankly didn't do as much as they ought to. I guess I just be blunt and say it that way. And so the local property taxes have helped immensely to make up for that. Again, not that the state doesn't do their fair share, one would argue, and you'll see another chart in a minute where it looks like they do an awful lot, but they're still not keeping up with inflation and with the costs that we actually have. Now let's look at our school district budget, the one that we're in, the budget that we're in right now. These are the different funds. There's several different funds that we have to go by. The first is the general fund, and that's based on revenue that we get based on our student enrollment. As you know, every school gets more funds if they have more students, fewer dollars if they have fewer students. Only makes sense. There are other factors that enter into that as well, but for the most part, it's based on student enrollment. The local referendum levy is part of the general fund, so that our local funds go straight into the general fund. That provides for classroom instruction, instructional supplies and equipment, and other educational activities. Provides for special ed and other state and federal mandated programs, or it includes those programs. Pupil transportation as well, facilities operation and maintenance, capital expenditures and improvements, and long-term facilities maintenance. And also we have our food service, which is a big factor, the school breakfast and the lunch program. And just as a reminder, you'll see it in a minute as well, whether since some point last year when it was realized that we needed help, all of the schools in actually the whole country. Our school program, the lunch program and breakfast program has been free for everybody. It doesn't matter if you apply for free and reduced, if you're qualified for free and reduced, doesn't matter. Everyone gets free lunch right now until we're through this pandemic that we're in the middle of. Hopefully we're at the end of it, but right now we're still getting free food for essentially for this whole school year. But we just gotten about a third of our way through. The other is a community fund. It's called Fund 4. This is a levy based on the adult population. It's different. It's based on the adult population in the district, not the student population in the district. Well, why? It's because it's intended to help adults in the community. It's not intended to be specifically for students. Early childhood levy is based on the number of children under 5 years of age, and it provides for the enrichment programs for any age level that are not part of the K-12 program. So it's not intended for our regular K through senior high kids. It's for the youngest ones and for those who are adults. So, for example, ECFE, early child family education is part of that. School readiness is a part of that. Adult basic education is part of that. And just community ed is part of that. So that's all coming out of Fund 4. Now, let's get into some dollars here for this year's budget that we're in right now. Last year, our general fund, let's not even go through all, just look at the bottom, because it just kind of gobbledygook with numbers at some point. So let's just look at that. Last year, our actual revenues we're talking about now were $3,776,000. This year, the budget at this point is for $3,725,000 and a bit more. The percent change is actually gone down a bit, and a good part of that is because of our food service costs going down. As you can see up a little further, food service went down 16%, and it's just nothing like what it was before. We still have to pay we have to still pay for the food, but nevertheless, it's gone down substantially. And in fact, all those areas, the general fund went down a bit less than 1%. Community service went down a bit less than 9%. So everything went down to some degree, and then the result of that is that our revenues are down by a little over 1%. And this is a pie chart, kind of saying the same thing, but just with a pie, sort of looking at it. That's where I was pointing out before that if you look at that, you can see the state aid is in the brown, and obviously they pay most of our costs for education, whereas the federal government doesn't pay much at all. And again, this is statewide. Our federal aid might be a little bit higher than that, would be a little bit higher than that, but and local taxes are 9%. So the local taxes, for the most part, don't really cover too much. They don't make too much of a difference, except that when you get to a point like we have, where, oh, no, you need those extra dollars, that extra couple $100,000 to continue going. That's the predicament that we can get in if we don't have a levy pass. But I just want to be clear that the state, obviously, we can argue they don't pay us enough, but nevertheless, we can see that they do provide a substantial amount of the cost of education of all the kiddos in Minnesota. What portion of each fund is levy? For example, the general fund, 9% is levy, as I just was showing. Other revenues of whatever type, federal and state and so forth, is 91%. Food service, none of it's levy. It's all from other revenues that we would get, either from people paying for food or because we get it from the state or the federal government. And then the community ed is a little different. And you can see that other revenues are 81%, the levy is 19%. And the last is debt service is all from levy. There's no debt service that we get from the state government or anything else. So this school year budget overview for expenditures, I just gave you the information on revenues. This is for expenditures. Let's just look quickly at this last year's. That was $3,208,000, and for the general fund, $188,000 for the food service, $126,000 for community service, for a total of about $3.5 million, $3,528,000 for the last year's expenditures. Now, this year that we're in, if you look at the bottom, it's $3,656,717. So it's an increase of 3.65%. So the expenditures have gone up. The revenues came down, but we're still in good shape for the year. Now, where are some of those dollars spent? We'll see district and state administration, which includes all the office staff. You can see what that cost is. District support services, instruction, typically teachers, and books and such as that. Vocational instruction, special ed is a different area for us. in some other areas, I add up to that 3,384,000. And I get a pie chart showing that with, as always is the case, salary and wages are 56.5% in our particular district. And that's typical. In fact, it's often a bit more than that. But if you add in employee benefits, you're talking about something closer to 72 or 3%. So it is most of, obviously it's the humans that run the show here, and that those are the costs that those are the higher of the costs that we have. But we also have capital expenditures, we have supplies and materials, we have purchase services that we get from the different entities. And that really adds up to the entire amount that we're talking about. Changing gears for just a bit. This is a bar graph showing our average daily membership, essentially our enrollment over the last several years, since 2013. It'd be interesting, for me at least, to see like back the last 40 years, but I can't find anything like that. This shows that in 2013, for example, we had 228 students. The way they count students, our best year, our highest number of students here was in 2014, the very next year, where we had 246. We've never been anywhere near that since or before that I know of. So the next year that dropped down to 232, and there are various reasons why that happened, and you're more familiar with that than I am. Then dropped down to 227, 209, 217, 2017, and 2018 it was at its lowest. 2018 around 204, 205 kids, and then since then it's gone up in the last 3 years approximately. It's increased, and now we're at the 220 kids, and I'll give you an enrollment report again a little bit later. So we're moving in the right direction. I told you before that my goal is for us to increase by 5 to 10 students every year. If we can do that, I think I said we'll be good. It won't happen forever and ever, but if we can do that to get back hopefully to around the 235, 240 range, and frankly, we're doing that. In just 2 years, 2.5 years that I've been here, we've increased by 20 kids. So we want to continue that. Obviously, every student that you enroll, it brings in the money that follows that youngster. And so that helps us. The more students that we have, the more that we can accomplish with all of our kids. And we're in a great position to do that because our typical class size is about 16 students. When I was in, for example, high school, I don't remember much about grade school. I remember high school, and we had 1,200 kids in our high school. And we had, for example, well, I couldn't tell you exactly, maybe 3 or 4 classes of Algebra 2 and Algebra 1. And they were all crammed. And when I taught, it was the same thing. But here, we have room, I guess I'll say it that way, we have room for several more kids in every single grade, with maybe one exception. And so and it wouldn't cost us any more. I mean, or very, very little more. So that's, as you can tell, I can repeat it more than once. That's my goal, is for us to do things that will cause more students to enter our school. And there are lots of things that we can do, lots of things that we've already done, obviously. But that's the goal. If we can do that, Butterfield-Odin is going to be around here for a long time. That's what we hope to have happen. Similar thing, but this is just a line graph showing exactly the same numbers. So you can see how it dropped off, and now it's kind of slowly coming back. Slow is fine. And it's we're doing what I was hoping we would be doing. This a graph. I'm going to throw it back over to Lindsay. This is a graph. As you can see, it shows on the left-hand side the fiscal year 21, which was last fiscal year, the beginning fund balances and so forth. But it then goes on to now. But if you don't, is that all right, Lindsay? Do you want to go through that?
Yeah, so this just is a nice portrait of, especially in our general fund where you got restricted dollars that are bound by state statute on what are eligible expenses towards them, and we're only allowed to code expenses for those categories. And so it just kind of shows you between the restricted and our other, which would be our unassigned and your non-spendable balance. Just kind of shows you where our budget falls within these categories, trying to use up restricted dollars first, but not always can you, because like I said, they're restricted in nature. And then it also shows you our food service and community service balances and kind of how our revenue and expenses fall within those categories, to make sure this is a good thing for myself, Mr. Thomas, and the board to continue to look at. This is what tells you if the district's healthy or not. It's your savings account, if you will, to simplify it. And it shows you what you can do when you're projecting into the next year based upon the reserves that you have.
And what it shows is that we're doing fairly well under the circumstances. And hopefully we'll continue to increase that. The school district levy, which is one of the things we're going to be doing at the regular board meeting. The 2021 payable 2022, and then the 21-22 school year that we're in. And that's payable for fiscal year. We actually get those monies in fiscal year 23. That's part of what, well, the most important part of what the this meeting is about, and then we take care of it at the board meeting coming up next. So factors, we kind of talked about this before, factors impacting tax change, issues driven by legislative decisions. The legislature can change the sales ratio if they want to. They can change the tax capacity rate if they choose to. They can pass laws that mandate different code compliance that would cost money and therefore taxes. And then other things are driven by the district voters. Voters approve, for example, building bond issues, or they might approve excess levy referenda. And that would, of course, raise taxes, or if they don't, that might lower taxes. Those are different factors that can impact the taxes. Other local factors, inflationary pressure on the real estate market. For example, recently, the value of property in the whole state, including our area, has gone up a bit. Well, what does that do? It raises the value. So that also raises the tax on that property. Person didn't do anything necessarily different to the home, but it's now worth more because of inflation, because people are wanting to buy homes, and a whole lot of different factors that are causing that. A lot of it brought on by COVID. And so inflationary pressure can also bring up the costs of taxes. Abatements, we've talked about that. If there are different abatements that come or go. Property tax improvements that were previously taxed. You do something nice to your house, you fix up your house nicely, spend $20,000-$30,000 to do different things to your home. And it wasn't on the previous tax bill, but it'll be on your next tax bill, or as soon as the folks realize that you did that work on your house. And so that's a reason for taxes to go up. Change in individual assessed market value. That's kind of leading to what I just mentioned, leads to that, a change in your assessed market value. Possible change in property classification. That doesn't happen too often, but for example, you have your home that you've had as a homestead, and then you decide you're going to rent out that to two families or something. Well, that changes what the property is, and so it changes how it's assessed as well. The taxes at 21 payable and 22. That's a comparison of certified payable 2020 levy with proposed payable 2021 levy. This is getting close to what we're talking about here, and what the whole point of this meeting is about. And Lindsay, I'll throw it over to you in a second. And it's and what the board will be voting on in just a little bit when we bring this to the board meeting. So could you go over this if you would?
Yes, so this is just a comparison of our total levy that you guys will be approving at the regular meeting tonight. So the proposed levy is $406,498.65, which is a comparison of what you approved last December of $354,128.51. That increase of $52,370 is made up of a couple different things. And you can see it's mostly in the general fund because the community service and the debt service are calculated differently. But in the general fund, what makes that up is there's been an increase in the pupil counts. There's been an increase in assessment of values. And there's also been adjustments that have been made. So there's certain levies that are, instead of being a year behind, they're of the year. So for example, we have been increasing the level of our CTE programs that are here at Butterfield. And that will also play a role.
So a question that someone would ask is, well, hold it now. We got more students, and that means we're gonna be paying more taxes? How does that work?
The formula is based upon pupil count, so it raises and lowers. So if you guys remember, actually last December in this meeting, we talked about, because I think our levy went down $46,000 last year, and the year before that, it was similar to that too. So you're gonna have those fluctuations every year, because the formula is based upon assessed values. It's based upon pupil counts, which no matter what, they're gonna fluctuate. We're not changing the formulas, we're not changing any of the voter approved items. It's just the fluctuation of the normal formulas that run through our levy system.
Yeah, I want to make that clear because I think a person looking at that's gonna say, you're raising my taxes by 17, 18%. What's going on? So,
Right.
but it's not that way. Okay. This is a resolution that we'll be voting on in just a little bit. Whereas pursuant to Minnesota statutes, the school board of Butterfield-Odin Public School District, Butterfield, Minnesota, is authorized to make the following proposed tax levies for general purposes. You see the general fund, the community service, general debt service. So the total proposed school tax levy would be, as Lindsay just mentioned a minute ago, would be that $406,498 $465. And then we say now with refer be resolved, et cetera, et cetera. That will be what we'll be voting on at the regular board meeting in just a few minutes. And so at this point, we are done with our presentation, and I can switch back to any of these slides if you had questions, or if you just want to ask any question at all, board members or the community. A lot of information, I know.
What falls into the restricted in the general fund category?
It is formulas that are like, so for existing, or for example, excuse me, long-term facility maintenance. That's something that can be only used for the not the renovation, but upkeep, for maintenance on your building. There's basic skills, and that incorporates using it for English learners and reduced class sizes, things like that. There's also safe schools. So if you need to purchase a camera or locks for a door, things to keep the school building or the school buses safe, items like that. Another big one is learning and development. That's another one in our elementary grades where we can use it to keep our class sizes reduced, especially in that kindergarten and first grade, where it's really important to have smaller class sizes for their development. So those are kind of the bigger ones.
Other questions? Don't hesitate to ask.
Other questions? Get a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn this meeting.
A motion by Christie. Do I have a second?
A second.
I have a second by Susan. Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's adjourned at 7:50.
Move right into the next one.
We'll call the meeting to order at 7:16